All right, so we're back with do a world-class listing presentation. As we talked about already, the triple option tested campaign and the net sheets. And then we know we have to get into the CMA, do the due diligence required for those three sources, from at least three sources. Now, as I mentioned, the net sheets are one of the most important things, if not the most important or most critical part of the presentation. So that's really what you want to get into. A lot of people use like a slide deck from PowerPoint they show on the iPad, but to me, they're too generic, and you'll hear exactly why I feel that way when I go through the entire presentation that I use. But before I get to the point where I'm using my actual presentation with the digital marketing strategy, I need to make sure I have as much information as I can to get a pretty solid CMA, at least in my opinion. So I'm going to show you how I actually do that with this video. So right here, as you remember, we talked about the seller's net sheet. So if these columns were blank, it would create a different amount of money. But let's just say for $500,000, let's look at a home that's maybe close to that. First thing you want to do is you go onto the, if you're in San Antonio, you go into the MLS, you go to the bottom right over here and you click on courthouse retrieval system. Once you've done that, then it's going to take you to the actual database by San Antonio Board of Realtors, and it sets up a connection so that you have the most accurate records that are available in the city. So basically, you go to street and you decide on what property you want to look over. And for me, I'm going to look at, whatever. I've had a couple of properties that I've looked at already in the past. So let's just say I'm going to go with this one. This Monticello property, or Montesino Drive property, seems to be close to what we're looking for. Single story, $425,000, $9,700 taxes every year, and it talks about the owner, what type of loan they have on it, all those different things. So you look at who it's made by, how many times it's been sold, when the last note was made on this home, all that good stuff. So when you look at it from that standpoint, this has all the information you're going to need literally to complete your listing agreement. Now, knowing that, you should probably print off a copy of this and keep that for filling out the net sheet. So what can I use from here to complete the net sheet? Well, if I go back to the net sheet, I know that it needs the taxes. And we just saw that the taxes were $9,700. So I put that in there. What else is on here that I could use? Okay, there's a loan balance. Okay, so the previous loan balance prior to this one was, it looks like 373, or was that the sales price? No, that's the sales price. So we look at the sales history, and then we look for the mortgage history. So they had a mortgage, let's say, because this got sold 2018, we want to look at 2012. There's a mortgage loan that was taken out at that time, $278,000. So $278,000 sales price of $425. Then you can go back to the net sheet, and you would put $425 as a sales price, $278 with the taxes in there. And when you say $425, $278, you're looking at what, $140,000, and then you subtract 36. So they're going to get back $105,000 on that property. So if I were to take this over to them and say, basically at that price, you're going to get back 105. If they say, well, is that on the high end or low end? Or I ask the strategy that I talk about, the high, the low, and then if there's a price they really want to get from that. If they say $105,000 is fine with them, then that might be on the upper end. I say, how would $95,000 back be for you guys? So that number would say 95,000 here, and they go, well, that's what we were hoping for. So then you use a low end net sheet. If they say, well, we're hoping for a little bit more, then you say, okay, here's another net sheet that shows you'll get back 110 or 105. How's that? Like, no, we're actually hoping for something like 120,000. So then we add in 15,000 more and try to sell it at that price and do a pocket listing. But that's where I get the numbers from, and the net sheet will tell me all I need to know based on how much they want to get back. As long as it was somewhat reasonable, I can use a pocket listing. If not, then I'm not going to do that. What's the other good thing about that? Well, I need to know if I was going to sell this home, if I could get that price. So before I can tell them that, I'd want to walk in with the options before I even mentioned it. They say we're looking for that number, and I'm thinking, no, that's the highest they can get, and they're thinking 440, 450. Then I need to have some reason or some way to justify that that's a little bit overpriced. Well, the good thing about this system is you go to comparables, you look up the price, or correction, you look up the property. It's going to basically tell you without you doing anything extra. It's going to give you one version of a CMA. All right, so it says just without looking at any other information, it could be anywhere from $378 to $542. So this is where I was mentioning it could be a little bit tighter, and we need to figure out why it's a variety for these numbers. It shouldn't be that far off. So if you scroll down, at least with our system with Sabor, you basically want to do two things before you even get started. First off, make sure it's in the same subdivision, and then start with 6 months instead of 12. Because obviously the closer together they are, the more likely they're going to be in the same neighborhoods with the same type of floor plans by the same builder. The more things they have in common, the more like the properties are, the more accurate the CMA is going to be. I don't like what I see at 6 months, so I'm going to go to 9. I like to have somewhere between 3 to 7 properties. 2 is just not a good number for me. And I have my own rationale for that. 2 properties are usually too diverse, so I need something almost triangulate, like getting a position on the GPS. It's a little bit easier to figure that out when you have 3 properties, at least for me, than 1. Now, since I can't seem to get anything past 12 months, I don't want to go past 12 months. So it looks like 432 and 434, that's what it looks like this house will probably sell for, just based on this one scenario. All right, so I would have to take this and look at the properties that are available and see. The subject property is 3,400 square feet, and then these are 2,900 and 3,100. I have to kind of make sure that they're the same size stories. They were built around the same year, sold, and I guess that's now counted as one of the sold properties. So the values for that property has gone up just based on the housing price index. So there's several things to look at while you're doing your CMA. But like I said, the net sheet gives you the guidance so you can fill in the blanks. So if I was going to try to sell the house next year, so far, just looking at these numbers, 128, 126, 124, that's very reasonable. So I look at that 432, 434, and I have to determine if in fact, that's good enough for me. Because it's only 2 properties, I want more data. So if you're not sure what some of these calculations are, one thing that this courthouse retrieval system allows us to do is calculate the mortgage. It shares with you how to calculate market value. So that's why I say a lot of times when someone is asking questions about why a certain CMA may look one way and why another one looks another way, if they don't understand what they're looking at, it's because they haven't done enough research. And like I said, I've had a person who actually asked me that, why am I manipulating the data? I'm like, there's nothing to manipulate. Just this alone, if you go into this system, tells you that the market value calculations, one way to calculate is average cost per square foot. And then it gives you the formula for how to do that. Then another one says the house price index, and there's a formula for that. Then the other one says the average sales price per tax appraisal ratio, and there's another formula for that. So depends on what information is available for them to calculate what the home is worth. Some neighborhoods you can get all 3, some you can only get 1, some you can only get 2. So if that's all you have available to you, then of course you have to go with the best guess scenario. And usually, even at that point, an appraiser is going to be the only one that can give a number that the bank is going to actually go with. Our CMAs mean nothing. So that's the issue. If we had a house we thought would appraise for 190, everything said it would, but the appraiser said 182 and $500. So what were we to do? We even challenging that appraisal didn't do us any good. He stuck by his guns, and that's what we ended up having to go with. And luckily, the client was willing to buy the house because, again, they wanted it that bad. So this, like I said, is one way to come up with those calculations. Another way is basically to figure out what subdivision this is in, and so we can go back and look at a more traditional way that people look at this. This is in the enclave. So we want to look up properties in this area that fall within that subdivision and see how many were sold pretty much throughout the subdivision, mostly one-story homes. I'm not really interested in much of the other ones, but we will take the information we have, which is 432, 434 so far, and then kind of see. So there's the enclave at the vineyard. So I like to take this information, at least with our MLS and our system, and go back to the database here and then do a search. So with 2 properties, like I said, I'm not extremely comfortable. If there had been 3, I'd be a little bit more comfortable. But right now, the data, at least they're consistent with those 2 different ways they calculated, 432 to 434. That's not bad. I will take that and see what else I come up with other calculations. And so from here, at least using our system here, I just go to select all, then unselect, check off all the sold properties, hit OK. Then I want to go into the subdivision common name. Put the information here, enclave at the vineyard, narrow the search. So maybe just enclave. Sometimes they have abbreviations, and if you don't put it in there exactly that way, it's not going to come out with the right information. So let's see what happens here. Now you just shorten it up until you see some options, and then you pick the right option from the choices available. And then they have enclave, enclave, enclave. 10 different pages of enclave now. So let's see which one so far comes up. Okay, there we go. Enclave at the vineyard. We check that box, hit OK. And then the other thing I want to do is maybe go with stories. But before I do that, I'm just going to see how many months of inventory is out there for just sold properties in the last 6 months. So I look at the properties that were sold for the last 6 months. I put that information there and hit count. Only one property. So what I'll do is go to 12 months. And then I count. And there's 3 properties. Okay, so that's better than nothing. And so I run with that. The 3 properties were sold in enclave at the vineyard in the last 12 months. Not too bad, not great. But then all I want to do from here is view the results of those 3 properties. And all I'm really looking to see is how like are these properties. If they're way off, 2 stories, 3 stories, that can help with the cost per square foot. But obviously, it's not going to be the most like properties as some of these other ones. So with this being the case, the ones that are in the subdivision, square footage is very similar to the ones we have. One's a lot larger, some are just underneath, but pretty close. Pretty close in square footage. So because they're pretty close in square foot, they're all in the same neighborhood. Then all I want to do is a one line, where it says one line summary, you go to CMA summary. And once you look at the CMA summary, it'll give you a much better indication of the average and median cost per square foot. So the highest 460, the lowest 398. We see those prices, and we know that ours is going to fall somewhere in between there. And so we're basically looking at cost per square foot. So do we want to say it's $94 per square foot? Because we saw 127 earlier, and then it says 138. So somewhere between 160, 116 and 125. So I'm starting to see, because of the median price around 125, and the number we just looked at was 127. The only thing I want to do at this point is look and see if one of these homes looks a lot like the one that we are trying to sell. So I took a look at the pictures, and the pictures tell me a lot. Sometimes people wonder, how why I look at the pictures. Well, if nothing else is in common, then that's what you want to see. Okay, this is 2-car garage, 1-story, very, very similar to that house, and 398, 750, and it's 3,256 square feet. So very, very similar to that house. The entrance looks exactly the same indoors. This is pretty much the same house. Little different look in some areas, but for the most part, yeah, very similar. So just from looking at that one home, if the others don't match up that well, then I know that this 3,256 square feet at $122 per square foot is pretty close to a number I can count on. So right now I'm looking at between 122 and 127 per square foot. Although that's not the only way to get these numbers, that's what I'm looking at to price this home. And since it happens to be a few 100 square feet more, then obviously, the listing price or the sales price is 407. It could go up for a little bit higher than that. So they end up selling it for a little more than they listed it, which is a good thing. It's actually sold at $125 per square foot. So that actually is the median price, which is perfect. Like I said, it turned out to be 127 at that, looking at the CRS data. So between 125 and 127, I thought it was like 122, but now that I look again, it shows the sales price was actually more. Well, that's the data you need. So if you go into this neighborhood now and you tell the person your home is going to sell for that price, that makes much more sense. Anywhere from 127 per square foot based on the comps from one system you do, 125 for another system that you use, and all these homes are a little bit different. Now, I might look at the other pictures, but I'm kind of convinced with that one because it looks almost identical to that home. And then I look at the other pictures here to kind of get an idea of what's going on with the square footage and all, and maybe because they're 2 stories. See, there it is. It's a 2-story home, so even though it may be more square footage, it's not quite the same when you compare 2-story properties to 1-story. But since this is all they had available to use as a comp for sold properties in this area, in this neighborhood, then that's all we had to go with, and that's totally fine. So the final piece that I would do, since I know it's 125 and 127, very, very close to what I'm looking for in price. So that's going to give me somewhere close to what I'm looking for as far as the $425,000 justification for putting in the net sheet. The only other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look up RPR. So you go to RPR, and it's the National Association of Realtors, and it's a tool that they give pretty much every realtor for paying their dues. So I look at what I have here, and again, I'm going to pull up a mini property report for the properties that I've looked at and see if those numbers are any different. So I believe this address, 1742 Montesino. Yep, I think that's correct. Then we do a search. And there you go. All the information I need. That's the sold price. Here is the RVM, which was updated just recently. And the comp analysis could be $459,697. What does that tell us? They've sold a few homes in that neighborhood and the prices are going up. This happens to be a corner lot, and they've sold some of these homes for all around the same range. So if you wanted to run off what we call a mini property report, you just click report. And I don't want to print the long one because it's like 70 something pages. Here's the mini property report. And I want to see what the data looks like on this thing now. Why? Because This report allows me to talk about a range to my client, whereas the other ones, I'm not really given a range. But they do give me the warm and fuzzy because I've done my research. I've done my due diligence now. I've looked at 3 different sources. One source tells me that, based on the housing price index, based on square footage, based on tax appraisal, that, yeah, those are numbers it came up with, and it was around $127 per square foot. The next one told me that the solds in the neighborhood for the last 12 months, there's only 2, or actually 3, but they were all commensurate to that 125, 122 to 125, more accurately 125. So now I want this one report that's going to actually help me explain to my client that there's a range that it could come or fall in, and I don't want to put myself on the hook to say it could only fall in the 425 price range. So this range, literally for this property, it says estimated range 401 to $444. So if they wanted to sell this same property, obviously it could be that low depending on what kind of condition the home is, but no, the current estimated value of this home is $423,000. It could be as high as $444,000. So I would tell any client I work with that I wouldn't be surprised if it falls anywhere from $401,000 to $444,000, if that's what the appraisal comes in. And they start asking, well, what would make a difference? Well, in this particular house, they'd actually finished out a room that was about an extra 100 or 200 square feet that added to the price of that home. So now it's a little bit larger than other homes in that neighborhood that were built on the exact same floor plan. So it actually could be a little bit more. It just depends. If someone says the comp analysis could be between 351 and 568, those are all the comps that came in the neighborhood, average price, 135. But this is what we're really more concerned with. And this is exactly what you can explain to your clients. You pull out this mini property report, you go on a listing appointment with them, you bring this with you or forward it to them ahead of time. You say that, it basically gives a disclaimer here anyway. Just read that to them. This represents an estimate of the sale property for this price. It is not the same as an opinion of value and an appraisal developed by a licensed appraiser under the uniform standards of professional appraisal practice. Right there, you're off the hook, and this is a 5-star confidence rating. And if you tell your client it could fall anywhere between here and here, it just depends on how the appraisal looks at it. And if there's other homes in the area that are in much better condition, have more upgrades, less upgrades, more square footage, etc. That way you have a range to use with your clients as opposed to trying to lock them in on one price. But also it'll give you an idea if they're way out of the ballpark. If they say something like $590,000 or $490,000, you're going, yeah, that's not even likely to happen at all. And that might be one that you would walk away with, especially if they're not listening to you and your opinions to drop the price of the home. But again, these are the kind of things you're going to have to do when you're doing your CMA. Bottom line is, I always tell people that CMA is comparative market analysis, but you are the A in the CMA. You're the one that has to do the analysis, not appraiser, but analysis. So you're not appraising the property, you're just analyzing the data so you have a good explanation for your client. That's what it boils down to. So if you look at the options again, we start off with a triple option test campaign. We look at net sheets. We've just figured out what to fill in with the net sheet. We knew it was $9,700. The loan balance was around $278, and then we know that this house could probably sell for $425. That's what I'm going to start with. I walk in with a net sheet for $425. I walk in with another one that has $435, and then if they say they want to sell it for a little bit more than that, then we talk about the pocket listing strategy. So that's really how you tie all these pieces together, and then you go and do your presentation using a digital marketing strategy, meaning every digital method you can think of, online method you can think of, you want to use, and the single property website is one great way to do that. And you want to send that before you get started as well. So there you go. That's module 4. Probably the biggest and most important piece is how to come up with those different values from your CMA. And I hope that helps. And we'll see you in the next video.